and how to treat common ailments. It was hard work, but Nia found herself thriving under Eo's guidance. She felt a deep connection to the land and the plants, and as she gained more knowledge, her confidence grew. Kai, now a few months old, was thriving as well. The villagers adored him, and Nia often found herself smiling as she watched him interact with the other children in the village. He was growing quickly, his bright eyes full of curiosity and energy. As Nia's skills as a healer improved, she began to offer her services to the village. She helped care for the sick and injured, using the herbs she had gathered to create healing salves and teas. The villagers were grateful for her help, and Nia felt a deep sense of fulfillment in knowing that she was contributing to the community. One day, as Nia walked in the village garden, harvesting herbs for a new remedy she was creating, Kesai approached her with a smile. "You've become quite the healer, Nia," Kesai said, her voice full of admiration. "The village is lucky to have you." Nia blushed at the compliment but smiled in return. "I'm just trying to do my part," she said. "I want to make sure that Kai and I have a future here." Kesai nodded, her expression softening. "You're doing more than that, Nia. You're building a life for yourself and your son. We're all proud of you." As Nia looked out over the village, watching the children play and the villagers go about their daily tasks, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had come a long way from the scared girl who had run away from Imora, and though there were still challenges ahead, Nia knew she was ready to face them. She had found her strength, her purpose, and her home. And no matter what the future held, she would protect her son and the life they had built together. As Nia's life in the village continued to blossom, the calm of the days began to feel like a blessing she couldn't quite trust. She had established a routine, had become a healer known and respected by the villagers, and, most importantly, was raising Kai in a safe, loving environment. Yet, there was always an undercurrent of unease. The memory of Kofi's visit haunted her, and though he had left, the possibility of his return lingered. One evening, as Nia sat by the fire with Kai sleeping in her lap, a storm began to gather in the distance. Dark clouds rolled in over the horizon, casting long shadows over the village. The air was thick with the promise of rain, and a sudden gust of wind rustled the leaves of the trees, carrying with it a sense of impending change. Kesai, who had come to visit, noticed Nia's gaze fixed on the darkening sky. "The weather's turning," Kesai said softly, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Storm's coming." Nia nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. The storm outside mirrored the storm brewing in her heart. "Do you think Kofi will come back?" Nia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kesai paused, her eyes filled with concern as she watched Nia. "He might," she said after a moment, her voice gentle. "But if he does, he'll find that you're not the same girl he left behind. You're stronger now, Nia. And you're not alone." Nia looked down at Kai, who stirred in his sleep, his tiny hand clutching the fabric of her dress. She had come so far, but the thought of losing him, of Kofi coming back to take what was hers, filled her with a dread she couldn't shake. "I'm afraid," Nia admitted, her voice trembling. "What if I can't protect him?" Kesai placed a comforting hand on Nia's arm. "You will protect him," she said firmly. "You're a mother, Nia. There's nothing stronger than a mother's love. And this village will stand with you, no matter what." Nia nodded, taking strength from Kesai's words, but the storm outside continued to churn, and with it, her fears. That night, as the rain began to fall, Nia lay awake, listening to the steady drumming of the raindrops against the roof. She held Kai close, whispering promises of protection to him as he slept. The next day dawned with a heavy atmosphere. The storm had passed, but the village felt different, as if the winds had stirred something deeper. Nia went about her daily tasks, gathering herbs and preparing remedies for the villagers, but a sense of unease followed her like a shadow. As she walked, One of the village children came running toward her, breathless and wide-eyed. "Nia, there's a man at the village entrance. He's looking for you." Nia's heart stopped. The words she had been dreading for months had finally arrived. She stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. Could it be Kofi? Had he come back to claim what he believed was his? Taking a deep breath, Nia handed Kai to Kesai, who had come to help her that morning. "Watch him," Nia said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "I'll go see what he wants." Kesai nodded, holding Kai close as Nia made her way toward the village entrance, her heart pounding in her chest. With each step, the fear grew stronger, but Nia forced herself to move forward. She had to face whatever was coming. When Nia reached the village entrance, her worst fears were confirmed. Kofi stood there, his arms crossed and a look of determination on his face. He was no longer the carefree boy she had once known. There was something darker, more dangerous about him now. "Nia," Kofi said, his voice low and filled with a cold confidence. "I told you I'd be back." Nia clenched her fist, fighting to keep her voice steady. "What do you want, Kofi?" Kofi's eyes flickered with something unsettling. "You know what I want," he said, taking a step toward her. "Kai is my son, and I've come to claim him." Nia's heart raced, her worst fears realized. She had known this day might come, but she wasn't prepared for the reality of it. "You don't get to claim him now," she said, her voice trembling with both fear and anger. "You walked away, Kofi. You left me to raise him alone." Kofi smirked, his eyes narrowing. "That may be true, but that doesn't change the fact that he's my blood. I have a right to my son, and I'm not living without him." Nia's blood ran cold. She could feel the weight of the villagers' eyes on her as they gathered around, sensing the tension in the air. She glanced around, seeing the worry and uncertainty on their faces. But then she saw Kesai, standing nearby with Kai in her arms, and Ao, who had come to stand beside her. They weren't going to let her face this alone. "You have no right to him," Nia said, her voice rising with the strength she had found in the village's support. "You're not his father in any way that matters. You left us, Kofi, and you can't just walk back into our lives when it suits you." Kofi's smirk faltered, and for a moment, Nia saw the frustration in his eyes. He hadn't expected her to stand up to him like this. "I'll take this to the village elders if I have to," Kofi said, his voice filled with thinly veiled anger. "I won't live without him." But before Nia could respond, Jebori, the village elder, stepped forward. His voice was calm but commanding as he addressed Kofi. "This village stands with Nia and her son," Jebori said, his eyes locked onto Kofi's. "You left them when they needed you, and that is not something we take lightly. If you want to take this to the elders, then we will stand as witnesses against you." Kofi's face hardened. He opened his mouth to respond, but the weight of the village's solidarity seemed to stop him. The tension in the air was thick, and for a moment, no one moved. Then, with a bitter sigh, Kofi turned on his heel and began to walk away, his footsteps heavy with defeat. "I'll be back," Kofi muttered over his shoulder, but his words lacked the confidence they had before. As Kofi disappeared into the distance, Nia felt a wave of relief wash over her. The villagers, including Kesai and Ao, gathered around her, offering words of comfort and support. She had faced Kofi and won, but she knew this wasn't the end. Kofi's anger wouldn't disappear so easily, and the threat of his return still loomed over her. But for now, Nia held Kai close and whispered softly, "I'll always protect you, no matter what." After Kofi's departure, the village returned to its quiet routine, but the air was still thick with the tension of his visit. Nia felt a mixture of relief and dread. She had stood up to Kofi, and the village had supported her, but she knew that Kofi wasn't finished. He had left, But his words had carried a warning, a promise that he would return. As Nia walked in the garden with Kesai the next morning, the two women talked quietly about what had happened. "He's not going to give up, is he?" Nia asked, her voice filled with worry. Kesai shook her head, her expression serious. "No, I don't think so. Men like Kofi don't take defeat well. But you're not alone, Nia. The village has your back." Nia nodded, grateful for Kesai's reassurance, but the fear still gnawed at her. She had fought so hard to build a life for herself and Kai in the village, but now it felt like that life was hanging by a thread. If Kofi came back with more determination, what would she do? That evening, a meeting was called by Jabari and the other elders. The entire village gathered around the fire pit, the soft glow of the flames illuminating their faces as Jabari addressed them. "We all witnessed what happened yesterday," Jabari began, his voice calm and measured. "Kofi came here to take what he believes is his, but we know the truth. Kai belongs to Nia, and she has raised him with love and strength. We must stand together to protect her and her child." The villagers murmured in agreement, and Nia felt a swell of gratitude as she looked around at the faces of the people who had become her family. They were ready to defend her, just as they had promised. Jabari continued, his eyes focused on Nia. "Kofi may return, and when he does, we must be prepared. If he challenges our decision, we will take it to the Council of Elders in Zeana. But know this, Nia and Kai are part of this village, and we will not let them be taken from us." The strength in Jabari's words gave Nia hope. She had feared Kofi's return, but now she knew that she wouldn't have to face him alone. The entire village was behind her, and they would fight for her if it came to that. As the meeting came to a close, Nia stood by the fire, watching as the villagers dispersed. Eo approached her, her expression gentle but serious. "You've come a long way, Nia," Eo said softly. "You've built a life for yourself and Kai, and no one will take that from you." Nia nodded, feeling the weight of Eo's words. She had indeed come a long way. She wasn't the same girl who had fled Emora in fear. She had grown, found her strength, and built a home for herself and her son. And now, with the village behind her, she knew she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. But as Nia lay in bed that night, holding Kai close, she couldn't help but wonder what Kofi's next move would be. He had left once, but his anger and determination were clear. She didn't doubt that he would return, and when he did, the real battle would begin. In the weeks that followed Kofi's visit, life in the village returned to a cautious calm. Though the villagers remained vigilant, there was a sense of peace that settled over the community, as if they were preparing for the storm they knew would come but were determined not to live in fear of it. Nia found herself cherishing the quiet moments with Kai more than ever. She marveled at how much he had grown, his tiny fingers grasping at the world around him, his eyes wide with curiosity as he explored the village. Every new milestone filled her with joy, a reminder of why she had fought so hard to protect him. One afternoon, as Nia sat by the riverbank watching Kai toddle around, Kesai joined her, carrying a basket of freshly picked herbs. "He's getting so big," Kesai said, smiling at the sight of Kai picking up stones and tossing them into the water with a delighted squeal. Nia nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "I know. Sometimes I can't believe how fast time is passing. It feels like just yesterday I was holding him in my arms, wondering how I would survive." Kesai sat beside Nia, her smile softening. "You've done more than survive, Nia. You've thrived. And so has Kai. You've built a life for the both of you, and no one can take that away." Nia sighed, looking out at the river as it flowed steadily by. "I know, but I still worry. Kofi hasn't come back yet, but I can't shake the feeling that he will. It's like I'm waiting for something to go wrong." Kesai reached out and placed a reassuring hand on Nia's arm. "We all know the risk," but you can't let fear control you. If he does come back, we'll be ready. But until then, you need to live in the present, not in the shadow of what might happen." Nia nodded, knowing Kesai was right. She had spent so long running, hiding, and fearing what the future might hold. But now, in this village, she had found something worth fighting for. She couldn't let her past haunt her forever. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the river, Nia scooped Kai up into her arms and held him close. He giggled, resting his head against her shoulder as she pressed a kiss to his soft hair. "We are going to be okay, Kai," Nia whispered, more to herself than to him. "No matter what happens, we'll find a way." Just when Nia began to believe that the threat of Kofi's return might never materialize, a new disturbance shook the village. It was a hot afternoon when a messenger arrived, his clothes dusty from travel and his face set with grim determination. He sought out Jabari, the village elder, and Nia noticed the tense expressions of the villagers as they gathered near the village center to hear what he had to say. The sight of the messenger immediately put Nia on edge. His presence was a signal that something was wrong. Nia approached the gathering cautiously, keeping Kai close as she joined Kesai and Ao, who had already heard the news. Jabari stood before the messenger, his arms crossed as he listened intently. The messenger's voice was low but carried an urgency that made everyone lean in. "I've come from Zayana," he said. "There is talk of a man who has been asking about a woman and child in one of the outer villages. He claims the child is his, and is gathering support to bring his case before the Council of Elders." Nia's blood ran cold. She knew, without a doubt, that the man the messenger spoke of was Kofi. He was preparing to take his claim to the council, and that meant only one thing: he wasn't going to let this go. Jabari's expression darkened as he considered the messenger's words. "And what do the elders in Zayana think of this man's claims?" he asked. The messenger shook his head. "It's difficult to say. The council is divided. Some believe that a father has a right to his child, while others are more sympathetic to the mother's plight. But Kofi is persistent. If he gathers enough support, he could bring this matter before them in a formal hearing." Nia felt the ground tilt beneath her as the full weight of the situation settled on her shoulders. If Kofi brought the case to the council, it would no longer be just between her and him. It would become a matter for the entire region to decide, and she didn't know if she could win against Kofi's claims. Ao stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Nia has raised her son with love and care. The village stands behind her. If Kofi brings this matter to the council, we will be there to defend her." Jabari nodded in agreement. "This village will not allow Nia to be taken from us, and we will not let Kai be claimed by a man who abandoned him. If Kofi wants to bring his case before the council, he will face the full weight of this community." The villagers murmured in agreement, their support filling the air like a protective shield around Nia and Kai. But despite their words of solidarity, Nia couldn't shake the fear that Kofi was stronger, more determined, and that he might succeed in ways she hadn't anticipated. As the meeting broke up, and the villagers
returned to their daily tasks, Nia felt Keisai's comforting presence beside her. "We'll get through this," Keisai said softly. "No matter what happens, you're not facing this alone." Nia nodded, though her heart still raced with fear. She had fought so hard to protect Kai, but now it seemed that the battle had only just begun. The following days were a blur of preparation. Nia couldn't help but feel the weight of the impending council hearing pressing down on her. Jabari and the village elders worked tirelessly to gather evidence and testimonies that would support Nia's case, while Nia focused on caring for Kai and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. One afternoon, as Nia sat outside the hut weaving a basket, Ao approached her with a serious expression. "Nia," Ao began, sitting beside her. "The Council of Elders in Zayana has agreed to hear Kofi's case. We've been summoned to appear in a week." Nia's stomach dropped. She had known this was coming, but hearing it confirmed filled her with a mixture of dread and determination. "What will happen at the hearing?" Nia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ao sighed. "The council will listen to both sides, Kofi's claims as the father, and your side as the mother who has raised Kai. They will make a decision based on what they believe is best for the child. But remember, Nia, you are not going to face this alone. The entire village will stand with you." Nia nodded, her heart racing. She had to be strong, not just for herself, but for Kai. She couldn't let Kofi take him away. But as the day of the hearing approached, Nia found herself struggling to stay calm. The fear of losing her son, of having her life torn apart once again, was overwhelming. The morning of the journey to Zayana arrived, and the village gathered to send Nia, Jabari, and the others off. Kasai hugged Nia tightly, her voice filled with reassurance. "You've got this, Nia. Just tell them the truth, and they'll see what we all know, that Kai belongs with you." Nia smiled weakly, her heart heavy as she climbed into the cart that would take them to Zayana. As the village faded into the distance, Nia held Kai close, her heart filled with both love and fear. The hearing was looming, and everything she had built was at stake. As they approached Zayana, the city loomed before them, vast and bustling with life. Nia had not returned since her desperate arrival months ago, and now, coming back under such dire circumstances, it felt both familiar and foreign. The hearing would take place the next day, and Nia knew that she had only one chance to convince the elders that Kai belonged with her. As she prepared herself for the battle ahead, she whispered a quiet promise to Kai as he slept in her arms. "I'll fight for you," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet determination. No matter what. The day of the council hearing arrived, and Nia could feel the tension in the air as she walked through the streets of Zayana, holding Kai close. The city was as overwhelming as she remembered, filled with noise, people, and the constant movement of life. But today, all of that faded into the background. Her focus was solely on what lay ahead. Jabari and Ao walked beside her, their presence reassuring, but Nia's heart still raced with fear. The Council of Elders was the highest authority in the region, and their decision would determine the future of her and Kai's life. She couldn't help but feel the weight of that responsibility pressing down on her. The hearing was held in a grand building at the center of Zayana, where the elders gathered to settle disputes and make important decisions for the people. As Nia entered the large hall, she saw the elders seated in a semicircle at the front of the room, their faces solemn and wise. The room was filled with people, villagers who had come to support her, as well as others who had come to witness the proceedings. But there, standing on the other side of the room, was Kofi. He was dressed in fine clothes, his expression one of confidence. Seeing him there, ready to fight for Kai, sent a wave of anger and fear through Nia. She tightened her grip on Kai, who was resting quietly in her arms, unaware of the battle about to unfold. The head elder, an imposing man with silver hair and deep-set eyes, called the hearing to order. "We are gathered today to hear the case of Kofi, who claims his right to the child known as Kai, and Nia, who contests that right. We will hear from both sides, and the council will make a decision based on the welfare of the child." Nia's heart pounded in her chest as the proceedings began. Kofi was given the chance to speak first, and his voice was smooth and confident as he addressed the council. "Honorable elders, I stand before you today as a father seeking to claim his rightful place in his son's life. I have traveled far to find Kai, and I am ready to provide for him, to give him the life he deserves." He gestured toward Nia, his eyes cold. While Nia has done her best, she is alone, with no means to support him. I, on the other hand, have resources and a stable life. I can give Kai the future he deserves. Nia's blood boiled as Kofi spoke, twisting the truth to suit his narrative. He made it sound as if she had done nothing for Kai, as if she had abandoned her responsibilities. She wanted to shout that he was the one who had abandoned them, but she forced herself to remain calm. Her time to speak would come. When Kofi finished, the head elder turned to Nia. "Nia, you may now present your case." Nia stood, her legs trembling slightly as she stepped forward. She glanced at Ao and Jabari, who nodded encouragingly, reminding her that she wasn't alone. Taking a deep breath, Nia began to speak. Honorable elders, I stand before you not just as Kai's mother, but as the person who has raised him, cared for him, and loved him since the moment he was born. Nia said, her voice growing stronger with each word. Kofi left us. He walked away when I needed him most, and I have raised Kai on my own, with the support of my village. She looked at the council, her eyes filled with emotion. Kai is my son, and I have done everything in my power to provide for him. I may not have Kofi's wealth, but I've given Kai something far more important: love, care, and a community that stands behind us. Nia glanced over at Kofi, her voice steady, but filled with conviction. Kofi may want to claim Kai now, but where was he when Kai needed him? Where was he when I was struggling to survive, when I had to leave my home to protect my child? He abandoned us, and now he wants to return because it suits him. The room was silent as Nia finished speaking. She could feel the weight of the council's attention on her, their eyes studying her, assessing her words. She prayed that they would see the truth, that they would understand that Kai belonged with her. After a long moment, the head elder turned to Jabari. Elder Jabari, as the representative of Nia's village, do you have anything to add? Jabari stood, his voice calm and steady. Honorable elders, I have watched Nia raise her son with strength and love. She has built a life for herself and Kai in our village, and we stand with her. Kai is thriving under her care, and it is clear to all of us that Nia is the best person to raise him. The head elder nodded thoughtfully, then turned to his fellow council members. There was a long, tense silence as the elders whispered among themselves, discussing the case and weighing their decision. Nia held her breath, her heart pounding as she
waited for their verdict. Finally, the head elder spoke. We have heard both sides, and we have taken into consideration the well-being of the child, which is our primary concern. While Kofi is the child's biological father, we cannot overlook the fact that he abandoned his responsibilities when the child was most in need. Nia's heart raced as the elder continued. Nia has shown herself to be a capable and loving mother, and she has the support of her community. Therefore, it is the decision of this council that Kai shall remain in Nia's care. Relief flooded through Nia, and she nearly collapsed with the weight of it. Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched Kai close, overwhelmed with gratitude. She had won. Kai would stay with her. Kofi's face darkened with anger, but he said nothing. The council's decision was final, and he had no choice but to accept it. Without another word, he turned and left the hall, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Nia watched him go, her heart still racing, but this time with relief instead of fear. She had faced her greatest fear, and she had come out victorious. Kai was safe, and they could finally move forward without the shadow of Kofi looming over them. As Nia left the council hall, surrounded by Jabari, Ao, and the other villagers, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The battle was over, and she had won. She had protected her son, and now they could begin the next chapter of their lives. The journey back to the village felt lighter, as though the weight of the past had finally been lifted from Nia's shoulders. The sun shone brightly, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of flowers as they made their way through the fields. Kai slept peacefully in Nia's arms, oblivious to the storm that had just passed. As the village came into view, Nia's heart swelled with a sense of belonging. This was her home, the place where she had found herself and built a life for her son. The villagers greeted them with cheers and smiles, celebrating the victory as if it were their own. And in many ways, they had all stood with her, supported her, and now they shared in her triumph. Kesa was the first to embrace Nia, her eyes shining with pride. I knew you could do it, Kesa said, hugging her tightly. You were so brave. Nia smiled, tears of joy welling in her eyes. I couldn't have done it without all of you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Kesai. Thank you for everything. As the villagers gathered around, offering their congratulations and kind words, Nia felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had faced her greatest fear, and now, she was free to move forward without the shadow of Kofi hanging over her. That evening, as the village celebrated with a feast, Nia sat by the fire with Kai in her lap, watching the flames dance and flicker in the night air. The sound of laughter and music filled the air, and for the first time in a long while, Nia felt truly at peace. Ao, sitting beside her, smiled warmly. "You've come a long way, Nia," she said softly. "I always knew you had the strength to fight for your son. And now, you can finally start the life you've always dreamed of." Nia looked down at Kai, who was gazing up at her with wide, curious eyes. She stroked his cheek gently, feeling the warmth of his tiny body against hers. "I don't know what the future holds," Nia said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "But whatever comes, I know we'll face it together." As the night wore on and the celebration continued, Nia allowed herself to relax, to savor the moment. She had fought so hard to protect Kai, and now, they had a future filled with hope and possibility. The days following the council's decision were filled with a renewed sense of purpose for Nia. She had won the battle for Kai, but more than that, she had secured their place in the village. The villagers continued to rally around her, offering their support in ways big and small. From helping with childcare to including her in every aspect of village life, Nia no longer felt like an outsider. One morning, as Nia walked in the village garden, Kesai joined her, as she often did, carrying her youngest child on her hip. "It feels good to be home again, doesn't it?" Kesai asked, smiling as she knelt down to help Nia pull weeds from the soil. Nia paused, wiping her brow as she looked out over the village. The sounds of children playing, women talking, and the occasional hum of a trader's cart moving down the path filled the air. For the first time in a long while, Nia truly felt at peace. "It does," Nia said, her voice soft but filled with contentment. "It's hard to believe how much has changed since I first arrived here." Kesai nodded. "You've changed too, Nia. You're stronger, more confident. You've built a life for yourself and Kai. That's something to be proud of." Nia smiled, feeling the weight of Kesai's words. She had indeed come a long way from the scared girl who had fled Imora in desperation. She had faced her fears, found her strength, and built a future for herself and her son. And now, she was determined to keep moving forward, no matter what challenges lay ahead. As they walked in the garden, Ao approached, her eyes twinkling with pride. "I see you two are hard at work," Ao said, her voice warm with approval. "Nia, I've been thinking. You've grown so much in your role as a healer, and I believe it's time for you to take on more responsibility. How would you feel about becoming the village's official healer?" Nia's eyes widened in surprise. She had been learning from Ao for months, but she hadn't expected to be offered such a significant role. I don't know if I'm ready," Nia said, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I still have so much to learn." Ao smiled kindly. "None of us are ever truly ready when we begin, but I've watched you grow into this role. You have the skills, the compassion, and the strength to be a healer for this village. You've already proven yourself." Nia glanced at Kesai, who nodded encouragingly. "You'd be perfect for the job, Nia. Everyone trusts you. You've helped so many people already." Nia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the offer settle in her chest. She had found joy and fulfillment in learning about healing, and the thought of taking on a greater role in the village filled her with both excitement and nervousness. But as she looked around at the people she had come to love, she knew this was the right path for her. "I'd be honored to take on the role," Nia said, her voice steady. "Thank you, Ao. I'll do my best." Ao smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "You'll do more than that, Nia. I'm sure of it." As Nia settled into her new role as the village's healer, she found herself busier than ever. People from all corners of the village came to her with ailments and injuries, seeking her guidance and care. It was challenging work, but Nia thrived in the role, finding purpose in helping those around her. One afternoon, as Nia was preparing a salve for a woman who had burned her hand while cooking, Kesai entered the hut, her expression filled with urgency. "Nia, there's a trader at the village entrance. He's hurt. They say he fell off his cart and hit his head." Nia's heart raced as she grabbed her bag of healing supplies and followed Kesai to the village entrance. When they arrived, Nia found the trader lying on the ground, his face pale and his breathing labored. A small group of villagers had gathered around, watching with concern. Nia knelt beside the man, her hands moving swiftly as she examined his injuries. His head was bleeding, and his pulse was weak, but he was still conscious. "He needs to be moved inside," Nia said, her voice calm but commanding. "We need to stop the bleeding and make sure he hasn't broken anything." The villagers quickly helped move the trader into a nearby hut, where Nia went to work cleaning the wound and bandaging his head. Her movements were confident and precise, the result of months of training under Ayo's watchful eye. As Nia walked, the trader's breathing steadied, and he slowly regained his strength. After several hours of rest, he was able to sit up, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said weakly, his voice rough from pain. "You've saved me." Nia smiled, feeling a swell of pride in her chest. "It's my job," she said simply. "But you'll need to rest for a few days before you can travel again. I'll check on you regularly to make sure you're healing properly." The trader nodded, his eyes filled with appreciation. "You're a good healer, Nia. The village is lucky to have you." As the days passed, Nia continued to care for the trader, ensuring that his recovery went smoothly. Word of her skills as a healer spread throughout the region, and soon, people from other villages began to seek her out for help. One evening, as Nia sat by the fire with Ayo and Kesai, she reflected on how far she had come. "I never imagined I'd become the village healer," Nia said, her voice filled with wonder. "It feels like a dream sometimes." Ayo smiled. "It's no dream, Nia. You've earned this. You've worked hard and proven yourself time and time again. And now, you're helping people in ways that will change their lives." Nia nodded, feeling the weight of Ayo's words. She had found her calling, and it was a gift she would never take for granted. Though life in the village had settled into a peaceful rhythm, Nia couldn't shake the feeling that something was on the horizon. Kofi had been silent since the council's decision, but she knew that his absence didn't mean he had given up. There was a tension in the air, as if the storm that had passed was only the beginning. One evening, as Nia sat by the fire with Kai playing at her feet, Jabori approached her, his expression troubled. "Nia, I need to speak with you," he said quietly. Nia's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Jabari sat down beside her, his eyes scanning the village before he spoke. "There have been rumors. Kofi hasn't left the region. He's been staying in Zeana, gathering support. He's still determined to take Kai from you." Nia's stomach turned with fear. She had hoped that the council's decision would be the end of Kofi's pursuit, but it seemed that he wasn't willing to let go so easily. "What can we do?" Nia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jabari's expression was grim. "We need to be prepared. The village is with you, but Kofi is dangerous. He may try to challenge the council's decision, or worse, take matters into his own hands. You need to stay vigilant." Nia nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. She had fought so hard to protect Kai, and the thought of losing him now was unbearable. "I won't let him take Kai," Nia said firmly, her voice filled with quiet determination. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect my son." Jabari placed a hand on Nia's shoulder, his expression serious. "We're with you, Nia. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." As the night deepened, Nia sat by the fire, holding Kai close as he drifted off to sleep. She knew that the battle with Kofi was far from over, but she also knew that she wasn't the same girl who had fled Imora in fear. She had grown stronger, and now, with the village by her side, she would fight for her son with everything she had. The days ahead would be difficult, but Nia was ready. She had faced the darkness before, and she would do it again. For Kai, for her future, and for the life she had built, she would stand her ground. In the days following Jabari's warning, Nia couldn't shake the growing sense of urgency. Kofi's silence was unsettling, and the news that he was still in Zayana, gathering support, gnawed at her every waking moment. She couldn't help but imagine the worst, that he would return stronger, more determined, and perhaps more desperate. Nia spent her days working in the village as usual, tending to her duties as the healer, but her mind was never far from the thought of protecting Kai. She kept a close eye on her surroundings, making sure she always knew where Kai was and who was with him. The village continued to be her safe haven, but now, with the looming threat of Kofi's return, Nia felt a tension she couldn't ignore. One evening, as Nia sat outside her hut with Ao, the older woman noticed the worry etched on Nia's face. "You've been on edge, child," Ao said softly, her eyes filled with concern. "You mustn't let this fear consume you. We'll find a way to deal with Kofi." Nia sighed, her fingers absently tracing the lines on the wooden bench. "I know, but it's hard not to worry. He's not going to give up, Ao. I can feel it. He's waiting for the right moment, and I don't know if I'm ready." Ao reached out and took Nia's hand, her grip firm but comforting. "You are ready. You've already faced him once and won. But you're not alone in this. The entire village stands behind you, and we'll make sure that he doesn't take Kai. Whatever Kofi is planning, we'll be prepared." Nia nodded, but the weight of the situation still pressed down on her. She had fought so hard for Kai, and the thought of losing him now, after everything they had been through, was unbearable. But Ao was right, she wasn't alone. The village was her strength, and together, they would face whatever came their way. It happened sooner than Nia expected. Just as the village was beginning to prepare for the harvest, a messenger arrived with grave news. Kofi had returned, and this time, he wasn't alone. He had brought several men with him, men who were loyal to him and willing to support his claim to Kai. The village was thrown into a state of heightened alert. Jabari quickly gathered the elders and called an emergency meeting. Nia stood at the edge of the gathering, clutching Kai close as she listened to the murmurs of concern and anger among the villagers. The tension was palpable, and Nia could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Jabari stepped forward, his voice strong and commanding. "We've known this day might come, and now it's here. Kofi has returned, but we will not allow him to take what is not his. Nia and Kai are part of this village, and we will stand with them." The villagers murmured in agreement, their loyalty to Nia unwavering. But the threat was real, and Nia knew that Kofi's return meant trouble. He wasn't coming back to negotiate, he was coming back to fight. As the meeting broke up, Ao and Kesai approached Nia, their faces filled with concern. "We'll keep Kai safe," Kesai said firmly. "Whatever Kofi is planning, he won't get past us." Ao nodded in agreement. "You fought too hard to let him take your son. We'll stand guard, and if he tries anything, the village will stop him." Nia's heart swelled with gratitude, but the fear still gnawed at her. She had never wanted things to come to this, to violence, to confrontation. But now, it seemed inevitable. Kofi had crossed the line, and there was no going back. That night, Nia barely slept. She lay awake, her mind racing with thoughts of what Kofi might do, of how she would protect Kai if things escalated. She imagined every possible scenario, her heart aching with the weight of it all. The morning was tense as the village prepared for Kofi's arrival. The men took up positions around the village, ready to defend Nia and Kai. Eo and the other women gathered the children, keeping them safe in the village's central hut, far from where the confrontation would take place. Nia stood by Jabari and Kesai, her heart racing as they watched the path that led to the village entrance. She held Kai close, her body tense with fear and determination. She had never wanted things to come to violence, but she knew she couldn't let Kofi take her son. Not after everything they had been through. Then, in the distance, Nia saw him. Kofi appeared on the path, flanked by several men. His expression was hard, and his eyes were filled with cold determination. He was no longer the boy she had once known, the boy she had loved. He was a stranger now, driven by a need to claim something that wasn't his. As Kofi and his men approached, Jabari stepped forward, his voice strong and commanding. "Kofi, you are not welcome here. The council has already decided Kai belongs with Nia. You have no claim to him." Kofi sneered, his eyes narrowing. "The council's decision means nothing to me. I am Kai's father, and I have every right to take him. I won't leave without my son." The tension in the air was thick as the two groups faced each other. Nia's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the confrontation unfold. She could feel the fear creeping in, but she refused to let it take hold. She couldn't show weakness now. Jabari took a step closer to Kofi, his voice low but filled with authority. "You will not take Kai from this village. We will not let you." Kofi's face twisted with anger. "You think you can stop me? You think a handful of villagers can stand in my way?" The men behind Kofi shifted, readying themselves for a fight, but Jabari remained calm, his eyes locked on Kofi's. "We are not just a handful of villagers. We are a community, and we protect our own. If you want to take Kai, you will have to go through all of us." Kofi's eyes flickered with frustration. He hadn't expected the village to be so united, so willing to stand against him. For a moment, he hesitated, his bravado faltering. But then, with a snarl, he raised his hand, signaling his men to move forward. The village erupted into chaos as Kofi's men lunged toward the villagers. Nia clutched Kai tightly to her chest, her heart racing as the men fought, pushing and shoving. The sounds of shouting and struggling filled the air, but through it all, Nia kept her eyes on Kofi. She saw him moving toward her, his eyes locked on Kai. Fear surged through her, but she refused to back down. With a surge of adrenaline, Nia stepped forward, blocking Kofi's path. "You will not take my son," Nia said, her voice trembling but filled with determination. "I fought too hard to let you take him from me." Kofi glared at her, his face twisted with anger. "He's my son, Nia. You can't keep him from me." Nia shook her head, her heart pounding in her chest. "You gave up that right when you left us. Kai is mine, and I will protect him, no matter what." For a moment, Kofi hesitated, his eyes flickering with something, uncertainty, perhaps regret. But it was quickly replaced by anger, and he lunged toward Nia, his hand reaching for Kai. But before he could touch her, Kofi was pulled back by Jabari, who had stepped in to protect Nia. Kofi struggled, but Jabari's grip was strong, and he forced Kofi to the ground, pinning him there as the other villagers subdued his men. The fight was over in minutes, but it felt like hours. Nia stood frozen, her heart racing as she watched Kofi struggle beneath Jabari's hold. The villagers had won, but Nia knew that this was only the beginning. Kofi glared up at her, his eyes filled with rage. "This isn't over, Nia. I'll be back. You can't keep him from me forever." Nia's heart pounded, but she held her ground. "I will always protect my son. You will never take him from me." Jabari and the villagers held Kofi and his men until they were escorted out of the village, ensuring they would not return. As the dust settled, Nia felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she knew that the fight wasn't truly over. Kofi's words echoed in her mind, he would be back. But for now, she had won. She had protected Kai, and she had the strength of the village behind her. The village had won the confrontation, but the threat of Kofi's return lingered in the air like a dark cloud. Nia couldn't shake the feeling that Kofi's next move would be more dangerous, more desperate. He had made it clear that he wasn't going to give up, and Nia knew that she needed to be prepared for whatever came next. Jabari, Eo, and the other village elders convened a meeting to discuss the situation. The villagers gathered once again, their faces filled with concern as they listened to the elders speak. Kofi is gone, for now, Jabari said, his voice steady. But we must remain vigilant. He will return, and we must be ready. We cannot allow him to disrupt our village or take Nia's child. Eo nodded in agreement. We must strengthen our defenses and ensure that the village remains a safe place for Nia and Kai. Kofi has shown that he is willing to use force, and we cannot take that lightly. The villagers murmured in agreement, their loyalty to Nia unshaken. But Nia knew that Kofi's next move wouldn't be as simple as another confrontation. He had tasted defeat, and now he would likely return with more dangerous tactics. As the meeting came to a close, Nia sat by the fire, holding Kai close. The fear of losing him still gnawed at her, but she knew that she couldn't let it consume her. She had faced Kofi before, and she had come out victorious. But now, she needed to be ready for the next battle. That night, as the village slept, Nia lay awake, her mind racing with thoughts of what Kofi might do next. Would he come back with more men? Would he try to take her in the dead of night? The possibilities were endless, and each one filled her with dread. But through the fear, Nia knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't give up. She had fought too hard to protect Kai, and she would continue to fight for him, no matter what. The village was her strength, and together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. As Nia drifted off to sleep, she whispered a quiet promise to her son, the same promise she had made many times before. I will always protect you, Kai. No matter what. In the days following Kofi's defeat, the village settled into an uneasy peace. Nia knew that it wouldn't last, that Kofi's words, his promise to return, were not empty threats. But for now, the village returned to its routine, and Nia focused on healing and caring for Kai. She spent her days in the garden, tending to the herbs that were used in her remedies, and caring for the villagers who came to her for help. It brought her a sense of calm, a welcome distraction from the looming danger. But no matter how peaceful the day seemed, the tension never left. Every sound, every unfamiliar face, made Nia's heart race with the fear that Kofi had returned. One morning, as Nia sat outside her hut with Kai playing nearby, Jabari approached her, his face grim. I've spoken with the other elders, he said, his voice low. We believe that Kofi will return sooner rather than later. He's lost face in front of his men, and he won't let that stand. We need to be prepared. Nia nodded, her stomach tightening with dread. What do you suggest we do? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Jabari sat down beside her, his eyes scanning the village as he spoke. We've decided to set up a rotation of villagers to keep watch at the entrance to the village. If Kofi or any of his men return, we'll know immediately. But more than that, we need to strengthen our defenses. We can't rely on simply outnumbering him again. Nia frowned, her mind racing. She hated the idea of the village being on constant alert because of her, but she knew that Jabari was right. They couldn't afford to be caught off guard if Kofi returned with more force. I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me, Nia said quietly. This is my fight, not the village's. Jabari shook his head, his expression firm. This village is your home, Nia. It's Kai's home. We are all in this together. Kofi isn't just threatening you, he's threatening all of us. And we won't stand by and let him take what's yours. Nia nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had spent so long fighting alone, but now, for the first time, she truly felt the strength of the village behind her. She wasn't facing this battle by herself. As Jabari stood to leave, Nia watched him go, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. She had fought so hard to protect Kai, and now, it seemed that the fight was far from over. As the village prepared for the possibility of Kofi's return, Nia threw herself into her work. She continued her role as the village healer, tending to the sick and injured, but she also began to train with the men and women who were strengthening the village's defenses. Jabari had insisted that everyone, men, women, and even the older children, learn basic self-defense skills, and Nia was no exception. Though she had never fought before, Nia found that she was stronger than she had realized. The fear that had once consumed her had been replaced with a fierce determination to protect her son. Under Jabari's guidance, she learned how to defend herself with a staff, how to disarm an attacker, and how to use the terrain of the village to her advantage. Kesai trained alongside her, offering support and encouragement. "You're doing great, Nia," Kesai said one afternoon as they sparred in the village square. "You've got the strength and the will. That's all you need." Nia smiled, wiping the sweat from her brow. "I never thought I'd be doing this," she admitted. "But I can't just sit back and wait for Kofi to come. I have to be ready." Kesai nodded, her expression serious. "We all do. This village is our home, and we'll protect it together." As the weeks passed, Nia became more confident in her abilities. She no longer felt like the scared girl who had fled from Imora. She had grown into someone who was capable, someone who could fight for herself and for her son. And with the village behind her, she felt stronger than ever. But despite the preparations, the fear of Kofi's return never left her. Every night, as she lay in bed with Kai asleep beside her, Nia's mind raced with thoughts of what might happen if Kofi came back. She had won the battle before, but the war was far from over. One day, as Nia walked in the village garden, she noticed a stranger approaching from the path that led into the village. He was a tall man, with broad shoulders and a weathered face, his clothes dusty from travel. The villagers, ever cautious after Kofi's visit, watched him closely as he approached. Jabari stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of the staff he carried. "Who are you, and what brings you to our village?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The man stopped a few paces from the village entrance, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I mean no harm," he said, his voice deep and steady. "My name is Tond, and I've come with news." Nia, standing nearby, felt a shiver of unease run through her. News could mean many things, and after all that had happened with Kofi, she had learned to be wary of strangers bearing information. "What kind of news?" Jabari asked, narrowing his eyes. Tom glanced around at the gathered villagers before speaking. "I've heard rumors that Kofi has been gathering men in Zayana. He's planning to make another move against this village, and it's going to be soon." Nia's heart dropped. She had known that Kofi would return, but hearing it confirmed sent a wave of fear crashing over her. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the terror building inside her. "How do you know this?" Tom turned to face Nia, his expression serious. "I've been traveling between villages for months, gathering information. I know Kofi. He's not going to give up easily. He's angry, and he wants to reclaim what he believes is his." Jabari frowned, studying the man carefully. "Why should we trust you? How do we know you're not working with Kofi?" Tom shook his head, his voice filled with conviction. "I'm not working with him. I have no loyalty to him. But I've seen the destruction he can cause, and I don't want to see another village fall to him." Nia looked into Tom's eyes, searching for any sign of deception, but all she saw was sincerity. "Why are you helping us?" she asked softly. Ton hesitated for a moment before answering. I lost my family to men like Kofi, he said quietly. I wasn't able to protect them, but if I can help protect you, then maybe I can find some peace. Jabari nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. We'll accept your help, Ton. But understand this, if you betray us, you'll regret it. Ton met Jabari's gaze without flinching. I won't betray you. I'm here to help. As the villagers dispersed, Nia approached Ton, her heart still heavy with the knowledge that Kofi's return was imminent. Thank you for warning us, she said quietly. But what do we do now? Ton looked at her, his expression serious. Now, we prepare. Kofi won't be expecting this village to be ready for him. If we're smart, we can stop him before he gets what he wants. Nia nodded, feeling the weight of the battle that lay ahead. She had fought so hard for Kai, and now, with Ton's help, she would fight again. With Ton's warning, the village went into high alert. Everyone knew that Kofi's return was inevitable, and now they had the chance to prepare in ways they hadn't before. Under Ton's guidance, the villagers fortified their defenses, building barricades at the village entrance and training in more advanced self-defense techniques. Ton quickly proved to be an invaluable asset. He was a skilled fighter, and his knowledge of Kofi's tactics gave the village an edge they hadn't had before. Nia spent hours training with him, learning how to better defend herself and Kai. Though the threat of Kofi's return still loomed large, Nia felt a renewed sense of hope. One evening, as the sun began to set over the village, Ton approached Nia as she walked in the garden. You're stronger than you realize, he said, watching her as she carefully harvested herbs. You fought for your son, and that's not something everyone can do. Nia glanced up at him, feeling a surge of gratitude. I've had no choice, she said softly. Kai is my ward. I'll do anything to protect him. Ton nodded, his eyes softening. That's what makes you strong. Kofi doesn't understand that kind of strength. He thinks power comes from force, from taking what he wants. But real power comes from love, from protecting those you care about. Nia smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Thank you, Ton. I needed to hear that. He smiled back at her, his expression filled with quiet understanding. You're going to be okay, Nia. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. As the night settled over the village, Nia felt a sense of calm that she hadn't felt in weeks. The battle with Kofi was still ahead, but with the support of the village and the strength she had found within herself, she knew she was ready. As the days passed, the village's preparations for Kofi's return intensified. Under Ton's guidance, the villagers built stronger barricades at the entrance to the village, fortified their homes, and practiced defensive tactics. Everyone was on high alert, ready for whatever Kofi might bring. Nia spent her days balancing her duties as the village healer with training alongside the others. The fear of Kofi's return still haunted her, but now it was tempered by a fierce resolve. She had built a life for herself and Kai in this village, and she wasn't about to let Kofi take that away. One evening, as the villagers gathered around the fire to discuss their plans, Ton stood before them, his expression serious. Kofi is a dangerous man, but he's predictable, Ton said. He'll come at us with force, hoping to intimidate us. But he won't be expecting us to fight back the way we will. We need to use that to our advantage. Jabari nodded, his arms crossed as he listened intently. What do you suggest? Ton looked around at the villagers, his voice steady. We'll divide into two groups. The first group will defend the village entrance, Kofi will expect that. The second group will hide in the trees surrounding the village. When Kofi's men try to breach the barricade, the second group will ambush them from behind. It will take them by surprise and throw them off balance. The villagers murmured in agreement, their determination clear. Nia felt a surge of pride as she watched the people she had come to know and love stand together in solidarity. This was her home, her family, and they were willing to fight for each other. As the meeting broke up, Nia approached Tond, her heart still heavy with the weight of the coming battle. "Do you really think we can win?" she asked softly, her voice laced with uncertainty. Tond smiled, his eyes filled with quiet confidence. "I do. We have something Kofi doesn't, unity. He may have more men, but we have the strength of a community that cares for each other. That's worth more than any army." Nia nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. She had been so focused on her fear of Kofi that she had almost forgotten the strength she had gained in this village. She wasn't alone anymore. She had people who cared about her, people who would fight for her and Kai. That night, as Nia lay in bed with Kai sleeping peacefully beside her, she whispered a quiet promise to herself. "I'll protect you, no matter what. We'll get through this together." The night before Kofi's expected return was filled with tension. The village was quiet, the usual sounds of laughter and conversation replaced by the hushed murmurs of people preparing for what was to come. Nia spent the evening in her hut, packing a small bag of essentials for Kai, just in case they had to leave the village quickly. Though she hoped it wouldn't come to that, she wanted to be prepared. Kesai came by to check on Nia, her face pale but determined. "How are you holding up?" Kesai asked, sitting down beside her. Nia sighed, glancing at Kai, who was playing quietly in the corner of the room. "I'm scared," she admitted. "But I know I have to be strong for him. I can't let Kofi take him." Kesai nodded, her expression serious. "You won't have to. We're all in this together, Nia. Kofi won't get past us." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation hanging heavy in the air. Then, Kesai smiled softly, her eyes filled with warmth. "Do you remember when you first arrived in the village? You were so scared, so unsure of yourself. And now, look at you. You're a healer, a mother, and a fighter. You've come so far, Nia." Nia felt a lump form in her throat at Kesai's words. "I never thought I'd be able to do all of this," she said quietly. "But I had to. For Kai." Kesai reached over and squeezed Nia's hand. "You're stronger than you know, Nia. And tomorrow, you show Kofi just how strong you are." As Kesai left the hut, Nia felt a surge of determination. She had fought so hard to protect Kai, and now, with the village behind her, she would face Kofi one last time. Whatever happened tomorrow, she knew that she wouldn't back down. That night, Nia barely slept. She lay awake, listening to the sounds of the village around her, the occasional whisper of the wind through the trees. She could feel the weight of the battle looming over her, but she also felt a deep sense of resolve. She had faced Kofi before, and she had come out stronger. Tomorrow would be no different. The morning dawned with a heavy sense of anticipation. The village was quiet, the air thick with tension as the villagers prepared for Kofi's arrival. Nia stood by the entrance to the village, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched the barricades being reinforced. Kai was safely tucked away with Kesai and the other children, hidden deep within the village. Jabari and Tond stood at the front, their expressions grim but determined. Nia felt a surge of gratitude for their leadership. They had both been instrumental in preparing the village for this moment. Now, all they could do was wait. It wasn't long before the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the path. Nia's heart raced as she saw Kofi and his men appear on the horizon, their faces set with determination. Kofi was at the front, his eyes locked on the village, a sneer playing on his lips. "He's here," Tond muttered, gripping his staff tightly. Jabari nodded, his voice steady. "Everyone, hold your positions." Kofi and his men stopped just short of the barricades, his eyes scanning the village with a look of disdain. "You think this will stop me?" Kofi called out, his voice dripping with arrogance. I'm taking what's mine. Hand over the boy, and no one has to get hurt. Jabari stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Kai is not yours, Kofi. You've lost your claim to him. Leave now, and no one has to get hurt. Kofi's face twisted with anger. I'm not leaving without my son, he snarled. You have no right to keep him from me. Nia's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the exchange. Kofi's men shifted behind him, ready for a fight. The tension in the air was palpable, and Nia knew that the moment of truth had arrived. Kofi raised his hand, signaling his men to attack. Take the village, he shouted. The battle erupted in an instant. Kofi's men charged toward the barricades, but the villagers were ready. The first group held the line, pushing back Kofi's men with staffs and makeshift weapons. But as Ton had planned, the second group, hidden in the trees, launched their ambush. They attacked Kofi's men from behind, throwing them into confusion. Nia fought alongside the others, her staff in hand as she defended the village. She had never fought like this before, but the fear of losing Kai gave her strength. Every strike, every block, was fueled by her love for her son and her determination to protect him. Kofi, seeing his men faltering, pushed forward through the chaos, his eyes locked on Nia. He reached her in a few strides, his face twisted with fury. You think you can stop me, he hissed, raising his hand to strike her. But Nia didn't back down. She swung her staff, catching Kofi's arm and knocking him back. I won't let you take him, she shouted, her voice filled with defiance. Kofi snarled, lunging at her again, but this time, Ton was there. He intercepted Kofi, pushing him back with a powerful strike. The two men grappled, each trying to gain the upper hand, but Ton was stronger, more skilled. With a final shove, Ton sent Kofi sprawling to the ground. This is over, Kofi, Ton said, his voice cold. Leave, or we'll make sure you never come back. Kofi glared up at Ton, his face filled with rage and humiliation. For a moment, it seemed like he might try to fight again, but then he looked around at his men, who were retreating in defeat. With a snarl, Kofi stood and backed away. This isn't over, he spat, but the weakness in his voice betrayed him. He turned and fled, his men following behind him. The battle was over. As Kofi and his men disappeared into the distance, a wave of relief washed over the village. The villagers, though exhausted and bruised, stood tall, their victory clear. They had defended their home, and more importantly, they had protected Nia and Kai. Nia stood in the center of the village, her heart still racing as she processed what had just happened. She had fought Kofi, faced him head-on, and she had won. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, and for a moment, she felt overwhelmed with emotion. Ton approached her, his face filled with pride. You did it, Nia, he said softly. You protected your son. Nia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I couldn't have done it without you, Ton. Thank you. He smiled, his eyes warm. It wasn't just me. The whole village stood with you. You're not alone anymore, Nia. As the villagers gathered around, offering words of comfort and congratulations, Nia felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had come to this village lost and afraid, but now she had found a home, a family, and a future. The days following the battle were filled with both relief and exhaustion. The villagers had won, but the effects of the confrontation with Kofi still lingered. Homes had been damaged, barricades torn down, and some of the villagers had sustained injuries. Despite the victory, the village had work to do. Nia spent most of her time tending to those who had been injured in the fight. Her role as the healer was more important than ever, and she moved from home to home, treating bruises, cuts, and sprains. The village's spirit, though shaken, remained strong. People worked together to rebuild, to strengthen what had been broken, and to prepare for the future. One afternoon, as Nia prepared a salve for a young boy with a deep cut on his arm, Kesai entered the hut with a basket of herbs. "How are you holding up?" Kesai asked, her voice filled with concern. Nia looked up, smiling softly despite her exhaustion. "I'm fine, just tired. There's been so much to do since the battle." Kesai nodded, setting the basket down beside Nia. "You've been incredible, Nia. You've helped so many people, and you've stayed strong through it all." Nia's smile faltered slightly as she thought about Kofi. "I still can't believe it's over. Part of me keeps waiting for him to come back." Kesai placed a hand on Nia's shoulder, her eyes filled with understanding. "You've been through so much, but you need to trust that you've won. Kofi is gone, and he won't come back. The village is stronger than he ever imagined." Nia nodded, feeling a weight lift off her chest. She had spent so long fearing Kofi's return, but now, for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that it truly was over. The village had stood by her, and they had won together. As Kesai helped Nia gather more herbs for the injured, Nia felt a sense of peace settle over her. The village was rebuilding, and with it, so was her sense of security. She had protected Kai, and now they could move forward with their lives. With the village slowly returning to normal, Nia turned her attention back to Kai. The months of fear and preparation had kept her focused on survival, but now she could finally breathe and enjoy the life she had built with her son. One evening, as the sun set over the village, casting a warm golden glow over the huts and trees, Nia took Kai to the riverbank where they often sat together. The water rippled gently, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of nature, birds chirping, the wind rustling the leaves, and the occasional splash of a fish jumping from the water. Kai, now growing more curious and active, played at the edge of the water, tossing pebbles into the river with delight. Nia watched him, her heart swelling with love. He had been her reason for fighting, her source of strength through all the fear and uncertainty. And now, she could finally promise him the future he deserved. As Kai toddled over to her, giggling with joy, Nia scooped him up into her arms and held him close. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, her voice soft but filled with determination. "I kept my promise, Kai. I protected you, and I always will. You're safe now." Kai looked up at her with wide, curious eyes, as if sensing the importance of her words. He rested his head against her shoulder, his small body warm and comforting in her arms. In that moment, Nia knew that everything she had fought for had been worth it. They sat by the riverbank until the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky turning a deep shade of purple. As the stars began to twinkle above them, Nia whispered another promise to herself and to Kai. "This is just the beginning, little one. We have a beautiful life ahead of us." Months passed, and the village continued to thrive. The memories of the battle with Kofi slowly faded into the past, replaced by the rhythms of daily life, the planting of crops, the gathering of herbs, the laughter of children playing in the fields. Nia, now fully embraced as the village healer, found joy in her work and in the community she had come to love. With Ton's help, the village remained prepared for any future threats, but the peace that had settled over them felt permanent. Kofi had been defeated, and the unity of the village had proven stronger than any force that sought to divide them. One morning, as Nia walked through the village with Kai holding her hand, she felt a deep sense of contentment. The village was alive with the sounds of people walking, children playing, and the hum of everyday life. She had found her place here, and Kai was growing up in a safe, loving environment. As they passed the village square, Nia saw Ton speaking with Jabori and Eo. He waved them over, and Nia smiled as she approached. "How's my little warrior?" Ton asked, crouching down to Kai's level and ruffling his hair. Kai giggled, reaching up to grab Ton's hand. Nia's heart swelled with gratitude for the role Ton had played in their lives. He had been a protector, a mentor, and a friend when they needed it most. Thank you, Nia said softly, her eyes meeting Ton's. For everything. I don't think I'll ever be able to repay you. Ton smiled, standing and placing a hand on her shoulder. You don't need to repay me, Nia. You've already done more than enough. You've built a life for yourself and Kai. That's all the repayment I need. Nia felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it was a tear of happiness, not sadness. She had come so far from the frightened girl who had run away from Imora. She had found her strength, her purpose, and most importantly, her family. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Nia's life settled into a peaceful rhythm. She continued her work as the village healer, helping those in need, while watching Kai grow into a curious, adventurous child. The village had become her home, and the people had become her family. And though the past had been filled with hardship, Nia now looked to the future with hope. She had fought for Kai, for her place in the world, and now she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the strength of the village behind her. One evening, as the sun set over the village, casting a warm golden glow over the fields, Nia sat outside her hut with Kai in her lap. She watched as the sky turned from orange to pink, the stars beginning to twinkle above them. This is our home now, Kai, Nia whispered, her voice filled with love and contentment. We are safe, and we are happy. And we'll always have each other. Kai looked up at her, his eyes wide with wonder, and Nia smiled. The future was bright, and for the first time in a long while, Nia felt at peace.